In 1999, a man with an illegal metal detector dug into a hillside in Germany and pulled something from the earth that no archaeologist had ever seen. It was a bronze disc roughly 30 centimeters across, covered in gold inlays, a crescent moon, a full circle, and dozens of scattered stars. Astronomers would later confirm it was a precise map of the night sky as it appeared over Central Europe in 1600 BCE. Nobody believed a Bronze Age culture was capable of making it. The hill is called the Mittelberg, a forested ridge near the small German town of Nebra in Saxony-Anhalt, eastern Germany. In 1999, it was a legally protected archaeological site, meaning any excavation without a permit was a criminal offense. Two men named Henry Westphal and Mario Renner ignored that law and brought metal detectors onto the hill. About half a meter below the surface, at the crest of the ridge, their detectors struck bronze. What came out of the ground measured 30 centimeters across and weighed 2.2 kilograms. Its bronze surface had oxidized over millennia to a deep blue-green, but the gold inlays were still intact. A large gold circle representing the sun or full moon, a crescent, and 32 scattered gold dots representing stars. Alongside the disc in the same pit lay two bronze swords, two bronze hatchets, a bronze chisel, and fragments of gold arm rings. They had no idea what they were looking at. The weapons buried with the disc provided the first dating evidence. Bronze Age metalwork specialists identified the sword's design as characteristic of Central European craftsmanship from approximately 1600 BCE, a period archaeologists call the Early Bronze Age. Isotope analysis of the disc's metal traced the chemical fingerprint of its copper, tin, and gold or sources consistent with that same era. The disc had been in the ground for approximately 3,600 years before those detectors found it. Westphal and Renner did not contact archaeologists. They sold the disc to a dealer for 31,000 Deutschmarks, roughly $15,000 at the 1999 exchange rate. Over the following 2 years, the object passed through multiple hands on the European black market for antiquities, its estimated value climbing with each transaction. Everyone in the chain understood they were handling something extraordinary. Nobody wanted to explain to the police where it had come from. By 2001, rumors of an extraordinary Bronze Age disc circulating in Germany's underground antiquities trade had reached Harald Meller, state archaeologist of Saxony-Anhalt and director of the State Museum of Prehistory in Halle. Meller had been searching for the object for months after blurry photographs of it began appearing among dealers. Then came a contact. Someone was willing to sell the disc for 700,000 euros. Meller went to the police. In February 2002, Harald Meller traveled to Basel, Switzerland, posing as a buyer alongside plainclothes police officers from both Germany and Switzerland. The sellers met him at a hotel and produced the disc from a bag. The moment the disc appeared on the table, police moved in and arrested the sellers on the spot. After more than 2 years circulating through criminal networks, the Nebra Sky Disc entered legitimate scientific custody for the first time. Initial examination at the German Archaeological Institute focused first on the 32 gold dots. They were not scattered randomly. A tight cluster of 7 dots on the right side of the disc matched the Pleiades, one of the most recognizable star groupings visible to the naked eye, with striking accuracy. The cluster's position corresponded precisely to how the Pleiades appeared in the autumn night sky around 1600 BCE when viewed from Central Europe. The Pleiades were not simply decorative in the ancient world, they were functional. In Bronze Age European agriculture, when this cluster rose on the western horizon near a crescent moon in spring, it signaled the time to begin plowing and planting. When they reappeared with the crescent in autumn, harvest was due. The Greek poet Hesiod described this exact practice in his poem Works and Days, composed around 700 BCE, but the Nebra disc encodes the same system nearly 900 years before Hesiod wrote a single word. But the Pleiades were not the most technically precise feature of the disc. 2 curved gold arcs ran along the left and right edges, each spanning an angular width of exactly 82 degrees. Astronomer Wolfhard Schlosser measured the significance of that number. At the latitude of the Mittelberg, 51.3 degrees north, the angular difference between the northernmost and southernmost sunset positions across a full year is exactly 82 degrees. These arcs were not decoration. They were measurements encoded in gold. Standing on the Mittelberg and watching the sun set, the left arc of the disk aligns with the winter solstice sunset position on the local horizon. The right arc marks the summer solstice sunset, and from the Mittelberg, that direction points toward the Brocken, the highest peak in the Harz Mountains 80 kilometers to the north. These two extreme sunset points define the full boundaries of the sun's annual movement. Whoever made this disk had watched the sky from this specific hill across multiple years and encoded what they measured in metal. Then metallurgical analysis revealed something that transformed the disk's meaning entirely. It had not been made in a single session. Chemical differences in the gold used for the stars, the horizon arcs, and the lower arc indicated at least 3 to 4 distinct phases of modification, likely spanning multiple generations. The sun, moon, and star layer was the original creation. The horizon arcs were added later, possibly a century or more afterward, almost certainly by a different hand. In the disk's third modification phase, a shorter arc was added along the bottom edge. Unlike the horizon arcs, this one had small embossed marks along its inner surface. Bronze Age specialists identified it as a solar bark, a mythological boat said to carry the sun through the underworld during the hours of darkness. Nearly identical symbols appear in Egyptian New Kingdom tomb art, in Mesopotamian cylinder seals, and later in Viking Age imagery. Someone in Bronze Age Germany was drawing on a cosmological idea that crossed the ancient world. In the fourth and final modification phase, small holes were punched at regular intervals around the outer rim of the disk. Their spacing suggests the disk was meant to be suspended, hung in a ritual space, mounted on a wall, or carried in procession on a cord. By this stage, the object had passed through at least 4 distinct episodes of intentional alteration, each carried out by people who inherited something they regarded as worth updating and preserving across generations. Then, around 1600 BCE, someone buried it. The circumstances of the burial are as deliberate as the disk itself. It was placed face down at the crest of the Mittelberg, at the precise point with unobstructed horizon views in all directions. The exact sightlines needed to make the astronomical observations encoded in its gold arcs. The accompanying swords showed no combat damage. They were ceremonial deposits, not discarded weapons. This was not a cache hidden in haste. Someone climbed to the top of a hill and chose to give the sky back to the earth. The makers of the disk belonged to the Únětice culture, named after a village in the modern Czech Republic where their artifacts were first formally studied in the 19th century. They are not a civilization most people have heard of, but the Únětice were Bronze Age Central Europe's dominant metalworking and trading power from roughly 2300 to 1600 BCE. Their trade network stretched from the tin mines of Cornwall in Britain to the amber shores of the Baltic, from alpine copper deposits to the broader Mediterranean world. Encoding the solstice alignments on the Nebra disk required something that no single generation could accomplish alone. To identify the extreme northern and southern sunset positions on a local horizon, observers must watch the sun set every clear evening for at least 1 full year, mark where it reaches its absolute limits, and measure the angle between them. This implies a sustained, organized tradition of sky observation, maintained by dedicated specialists across multiple generations from this specific hilltop. The Mittelberg disk was being used and refined during the same broad era that Stonehenge received its final configurations, approximately 1500 to 1600 BCE. Both sites encode summer and winter solstice alignments. Both cultures participated in overlapping Bronze Age trade networks that moved goods and ideas across vast distances. The Nebra disk appears to be a portable, handheld version of the same astronomical knowledge that required thousands of tons of stone to express at Salisbury Plain in England. In 2020, archaeologists Rupert Gebhard and Rüdiger Krauss published a formal challenge in the journal Archaeologisk Informationen. They argued that the claimed find spot on the Mittelberg had never been properly documented because the excavation was illegal, and that soil samples taken years after the fact could not definitively prove the disk came from that location. They proposed the disk might belong to the Iron Age rather than the Bronze Age, making it potentially 1,000 years younger than accepted. The wider archaeological community responded in detail. The bronze swords found alongside the disc had been independently dated to approximately 1600 BCE by multiple analytical methods before the challenge paper appeared, and that dating was not disputed. Lead isotope studies of the disc's metal confirmed components consistent with known Bronze Age or sources in Central Europe. Harald Meller published a point-by-point rebuttal, and the scholarly consensus held, the Nebra Sky Disc is Bronze Age, and it is genuine. Henry Westphal and Mario Renner, the two men who originally excavated the disc without authorization, were prosecuted and convicted under German heritage protection law. Their case became a landmark prosecution in German archaeological enforcement. Authorities used it to argue for stronger legal protections across the Bronze Age sites of Central Europe, where illegal metal detecting continues to strip unexcavated ground of objects and context every single year. Harald Meller later estimated what the illegal extraction had permanently destroyed. The angle at which the disc lay in the soil, the chemical composition of the sediment immediately surrounding it, the precise spatial relationship between the swords and the disc, all of that data was gone in the few minutes it took Westphal and Renner to pull the objects out of the ground. In professional archaeology, context is not background detail. Context carries as much information as the object itself. What makes the Nebra disc unlike any other prehistoric artifact is that it does not do one thing. It does everything at once. The horizon arcs are precise angular measurements tied to a specific latitude. The Pleiades are a functional agricultural calendar marker. The solar bark is a mythological cosmology of the underworld. These are not separate features. They are a single integrated system encoding how time works, how to read the sky, and what happens to the sun when you cannot see it. An entire Bronze Age worldview, compressed into 30 centimeters of bronze. The Pleiades encoded on the Nebra disc also appear in Babylonian astronomical tablets, Egyptian agricultural calendars, the oral traditions of the Maori of New Zealand, the star lore of Aboriginal Australians, and the mythologies of indigenous cultures across the Americas. Nearly every ancient civilization that left records attached seasonal significance to this same cluster. The Únětice people, in their forest in central Germany, were participating in a global conversation about the night sky, without knowing any of the other participants existed. Before the Nebra disc was understood, Central European prehistory was routinely described as peripheral. Capable Bronze Age metalworkers living at the cultural margins of Egypt and Mesopotamia, not systematic thinkers or astronomers. The disc made that picture impossible to hold. Here was a culture maintaining multi-year observational programs, encoding the results in a precisely crafted physical medium, and refining that knowledge across at least 4 generations of intentional modification. These were not people in a backwater. They were doing organized science. The original Nebra Sky Disc is now on permanent display at the Landesmuseum für Vorgeschichte, the State Museum of Prehistory, in Halle, Germany, where Harald Meller serves as director. In 2013, UNESCO added it to the Memory of the World Register, a list of humanity's most significant documentary heritage. It sits on that register alongside Magna Carta, the Gutenberg Bible, and the original manuscript of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, a Bronze Age bronze disc in the formal company of civilization's founding documents. The Mittelberg find was, in one sense, entirely accidental. 2 men on one hill, on one afternoon in 1999. The Únětice culture's territory once covered modern Germany, Poland, Austria, and the Czech Republic. Hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land that produced the metalworkers of Bronze Age Europe. Professional excavation of Bronze Age sites in this region remains limited by funding and scale. Statistically, the Nebra disc is almost certainly not unique. It is the object that happened to surface. The Únětice left no writing system, no named rulers, no inscribed stone temples. What they left was bronze, axes, torques, neck rings, and one extraordinary disc. That disc tells us they had dedicated sky watchers conducting systematic multi-year observations from a fixed point. It tells us they had metalworkers precise enough to render those observations as sub-millimeter gold inlays. It tells us they passed this knowledge down through generations, each one choosing to add rather than erase. They were fully literate in the language of the sky. Greenland ice cores record a significant volcanic cooling event beginning around 1628 BCE. A stratospheric aerosol layer almost certainly from a major eruption that reduced solar radiation reaching Europe for years and disrupted agriculture across the continent. Climate data shows temperatures and harvests declining sharply in Central Europe across the following decades. The Únětice culture, whose sophisticated calendar farming depended on precise sky watching, fades from the archaeological record around 1600 BCE, right at the end of that climate shock. Whoever climbed the Mittelberg for the last time carried the disc and the ceremonial swords to the crest of the hill, placed the disc face down in a pit at the point of maximum horizon visibility, covered it with soil, and left without marking the spot. There is no stone, no mound, no inscription above the burial. 3,600 years passed. A metal detector beeped on that crest in 1999. What someone had buried with such careful intention had waited, undisturbed, for a world finally equipped to read it. The Nebra Sky Disc did not come from Egypt or Babylon or Greece. It came from people whose names are lost and whose language vanished with them. People living in a forest in central Germany who nonetheless tracked the Pleiades, measured the solstices, and fused precise observation with mythological meaning into a single object small enough to hold in two hands. The disc was not found in a palace or a royal tomb. It was buried alone, on a hill, as if it belonged to the sky itself. What do you think they were trying to preserve when they put it back in the ground? Tell us in the comments.